Every Spitfire ever built, Mark 1 to Mark 24. And no two of them were really the same aeroplane. The Spitfire didn't survive the war because it was good. It survived because it was rebuilt over and over, every time something appeared in the sky that could kill it. 24 times. And the last time a Spitfire was ever shot out of the sky in combat, the aircraft that shot it down was another Spitfire. I spent 3 weeks going through production records, squadron combat reports, and pilot testimony to put every single mark in one place. 20,351 airframes. One production line that never stopped, not once, in 6 years of war. Because if it stopped, Britain lost the sky. Everyone knows the Spitfire won the Battle of Britain. But the Spitfire that fought that battle was outclassed within a year. And the Mark that did more fighting than any other is one most people can't even name. Start with the aeroplane everyone pictures. Merlin. Two-bladed propeller. 8 rifle-caliber machine guns spread across that elliptical wing. It was beautiful. It was also, in one specific way, broken. The Merlin fed its fuel through a float, pushed the nose down hard, and the petrol was thrown away from the pipe. The engine coughed. The Messerschmitt 109 had fuel injection. It could bunt straight into a dive and go. The Spitfire pilot had to roll upside down first, and by the time he was pointing the right way, the German was gone. So the fastest fighter in Britain had a get-out clause built into its engine. And the Germans knew it. The fix wasn't a new engine. It was a metal washer with a hole in it, designed by an engineer at Farnborough named Beatrice Schilling. And it didn't reach the squadrons until March 1941, months after the Battle of Britain was over. Spitfires were credited with 529 enemy aircraft in that battle for the loss of 230 of their own. But the Hurricane, which nobody puts on a poster, is credited with more than half of everything Fighter Command shot down. The bigger problem was not the aeroplane, though. It was that Britain could not build enough of them. A vast shadow factory had been raised at Castle Bromwich, run by Lord Nuffield, the car magnate. It cost £4 million. It promised 60 Spitfires a week from April 1940. By May, with the Germans in France, it had delivered exactly none. Beaverbrook phoned Nuffield. Nuffield, thinking he held the winning card, offered to hand the factory back. Beaverbrook accepted on the spot. Vickers took over. 10 Spitfires came out in June, 23 in July, 37 in August. Those were Mark IIs, Merlin 12, Castle Bromwich built, and the first squadron did not get them until August 1940, deep into the battle they are now remembered for. Which leaves the Mark III. Stronger wing, retractable tail wheel, everything the Spitfire needed. It was cancelled. One was built, serial N3297. And that single cancelled aeroplane, the failure, the dead end, the one nobody wanted, was the airframe Rolls-Royce would take to Hucknall a year later and bolt a new engine into. Geoffrey Quill called what came out of it a quantum leap. But before any of that mattered, the Spitfire had to survive 1941. And in 1941, something arrived over France that made every one of these aeroplanes obsolete in an afternoon. The Mark V is the most built Spitfire of all, 6,479 of them. On paper, it was a Mark I with a bigger engine, the Merlin 45, 1,440 horsepower on takeoff. In practice, it was 3 aeroplanes wearing one name. The VR kept the old 8 machine guns. Only 94 were built. One of them was flown by Douglas Bader. The VB added two 20mm cannon, the version most people picture. And the VC got the universal wing, which could carry 4 cannon if you wanted it to. Send it to Malta or the desert, and it grew a bulbous filter under the nose, the Vokes, to stop sand chewing the engine. It kept the Spitfire alive in North Africa, and it cost its speed. Cut the wingtips square, and you got the LF Mark V. Faster and crisper down low, where the fighting was moving. And then, in the autumn of 1941, over the Channel, RAF pilots met an aeroplane with a radial engine and a wide, square wing. The Focke-Wulf 190 climbed better than the Mark V. It dived better. It was faster. And it rolled so fast that a Spitfire pilot could watch it flick onto its back and vanish downwards before he'd finished thinking about it. There was exactly one thing the Spitfire could still do better. It could turn. That's not a fighter advantage. That's a survival advantage. And you don't win a war by surviving. By November 1941, the RAF had stopped almost all daylight operations over occupied Europe. They tried again in the spring of 1942. The losses were so bad they stopped again. Britain's most famous fighter had been beaten in the air over France, and it did not have an answer. The answer, when it came, was never supposed to exist, because at the same time, another problem was flying over England, and nobody could reach it. The Junkers 86 was a pressurized reconnaissance bomber that cruised at heights where a Spitfire's engine was gasping and its pilot was on the edge of blacking out. So Supermarine built the Mark VI, pressurized cockpit, extended pointed wingtips. It reached 616 Squadron in April 1942, and it was never really any good. The pressurization gear was heavy, and the weight ate the very ceiling it was built to reach. The canopy was bolted down over the pilot before takeoff. He was sealed in. The Mark VII did it properly, with a 2-stage supercharged Merlin. A high-altitude Mark VII could reach 45,000 feet. The French ace Pierre Clostermann describes one of them catching a German reconnaissance aircraft at 40,000 feet over Scapa Flow. Only around 140 were built. And then the Mark VIII. Take the Mark VII, throw away the pressure cabin, keep the strengthened airframe, the retractable tailwheel, the refined controls, and you have what many pilots called the sweetest Spitfire ever made. 1,658 of them. Here's the thing. The Mark VIII was the Spitfire that was supposed to answer the Focke-Wulf 190. It was designed for it. It was better than the aeroplane that ended up doing the job. It just needed a redesigned fuselage, and a redesigned fuselage takes over a year. The RAF did not have a year. It had months. So somebody made a decision that should not have worked. Take the new 2-stage Merlin 61, the engine designed for a high-altitude bomber. Take an existing Mark V fuselage straight off the line. Bolt them together, change as little as humanly possible. That's it. That's the whole idea. A longer nose, a 4-bladed propeller, an extra radiator under the wing to cool the thing. Nothing else. The first test aircraft flew on the 26th of February, 1942. It was in full production by June and in a squadron by July. 4 months, from drawing to front line. The Air Fighting Development Unit's report put it flatly. The performance of the Spitfire Mark IX was outstandingly better than the Spitfire Mark V, especially above 20,000 feet. 409 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour faster than the aeroplane it was built out of. But the real weapon was not the speed. It was that from 100 yards away, a German pilot could not tell a Mark 9 from a Mark 5. So he had two choices: treat every Spitfire he saw as the dangerous one and give up the initiative he had enjoyed for a year, or gamble that it was the old one. Some of them gambled. The Mark 9 was not a miracle, and it is worth being honest about that. It fought the FW-190 to a draw, not to a defeat, and roughly half of the first 100 delivered failed to return. Parity was the whole point. Parity was what Britain had lost. And a note for anyone who has been arguing about this in the comments for years. The LF in LF Mark 9 does not mean the wings are clipped. It refers to the engine, the Merlin 66, rated for low altitude. You can have an LF Mark 9 with perfectly normal elliptical wingtips. Over 4,000 LF Mark 9s were built, more than any other version of the Mark. In September 1942, a stripped-down Mark 9 climbed to around 43,000 feet over southern England and intercepted one of those untouchable Junkers 86. It remains, by most accounts, the highest altitude air combat of the Second World War. The problem the Mark 6 and Mark 7 were built to solve was solved by the aeroplane that was never meant to exist. 5,665 Mark 9 aircraft were built. Then, in 1944, the Americans started building Merlin engines under license at Packard. Bolt one of those into a Mark 9, and for reasons of paperwork and spare parts, it stopped being a Mark 9. It became the Mark 16, 1,054 of them. Same aeroplane, different engine badge. Most of the late ones had the rear fuselage cut down and a teardrop canopy fitted so the pilot could finally see behind himself. The Spitfire was now, quietly, a completely different machine from the one that flew in 1936. And in one branch of the family, it had already thrown away its guns entirely. In October 1939, 2 Spitfire Mark 1s were handed to a man named Sidney Cotton. He took the guns out, sealed the gun ports, filled every joint and gap in the airframe, and polished the whole thing until it was slick. Then he put 2 cameras where the inner guns had been. The result was 10 to 15 miles an hour faster than the fighter it came from, painted a strange pale blue and completely defenseless. That's the deal these pilots took, alone, unarmed, over Germany. The variants ran from Type A to Type G, then got renumbered. The Photo Reconnaissance Mark IV turned the leading edge of the wing itself into a fuel tank, 66 gallons in each wing, ahead of the spar, which is why they called it the Bowser wing. The Photo Reconnaissance Mark X got a pressurized cockpit. 16 were built. 16. The Photo Reconnaissance Mark XI was the workhorse. 471 built, the fastest Merlin Spitfire ever made, with a deeper nose to hold the bigger oil tank. The Photo Reconnaissance Mark XIII went the other way, low, fast, and unusually for a Photo Reconnaissance Spitfire armed with 4 machine guns, because down at that height, something was going to see you. 26 were converted. They flew along the Normandy coast at low level, photographing the beaches before D-Day. And the Photo Reconnaissance Mark XIX was the last of them, and the fastest Spitfire of any kind. 460 miles an hour, 225 built. Remember that one. It comes back at the end of this story, and not in the way you'd expect, because by now the Merlin had run out of road. The Rolls-Royce Griffon was a bigger engine in the simplest possible sense. The Merlin displaced 27 litres. The Griffon displaced 37, roughly the same size on the outside, a third more engine inside it. And one detail that caught out every pilot who converted onto it: the propeller turned the other way. Every Spitfire pilot alive had a reflex burned into his left leg for takeoff. In a Griffon Spitfire, that reflex was now precisely, dangerously wrong. The prototypes were DP-845 and DP-851, and they were originally called the Mark IV, until someone noticed there was already a PR Mark IV, so they renamed them the Mark Weichsee. This is a real thing that really happened, and it has been confusing people for 80 years. In July 1942, Jeffrey Quill flew DP-845 at Farnborough against a captured FW-190 and a new Hawker Typhoon. The Spitfire was there as the benchmark, the slow one, the datum, the aeroplane the other two were supposed to humiliate. It beat them both. That flight is why the Mark 12 exists. A Griffon in a Mark V airframe, wings clipped, built for one job: catching the FW-190s that were screaming across the channel at wave height, hitting seaside towns, and running home before anyone could climb. 100 were built. 2 squadrons flew them, and later, when the flying bombs came, Mark 12 pilots were credited with over 80 V1s. Then came the one they'd been building towards. The Mark 14, 2-stage Griffon, 5-bladed propeller, a fin so much bigger it changed the aeroplane's whole profile. 446 miles an hour, 957 built. The Mark 14 spent the summer of 1944 hunting V1 flying bombs across Kent. Mark 14 pilots are credited with over 300 of them. A single squadron, 91, accounts for 104. And then it went hunting jets. The Messerschmitt 262 was 100 miles an hour faster than anything the RAF had. The Mark 14 was one of the very few piston fighters with any hope of catching one. So here's the thing worth being precise about, because it gets repeated wrongly constantly. The first Me-262, credited as destroyed by a Spitfire, is generally attributed not to the mighty Griffon-engined Mark XIV, but to a Mark IX of 401 Squadron on the 5th of October 1944. The bodge job got the jet. The last of the war-built fighters was the Mark 88, a strengthened Mark XIV with more fuel and, in its fighter reconnaissance form, a camera in the rear fuselage. 300 were built. It arrived too late for the war it was designed for and went to Palestine and Malaya instead. Remember the FR, Mark 18 as well. It's about to matter enormously. First, the numbers change. Up to the end of 1942, the RAF used Roman numerals. From 1943, new aircraft got Arabic ones. From 1948, Arabic only. That's why the family runs 1, 5, 9, 14, 16, and then 21, 22, 24. The Mark 21 got an entirely new wing. Stronger, a different shape, 4 20mm cannon, undercarriage doors that finally covered the wheels. The changes were so fundamental that the Air Ministry seriously discussed dropping the name Spitfire altogether and calling it the Victor. It handled badly at first. Fixing the rudder and elevators sorted it. 120 were built. They reached a squadron in January 1945, saw almost no combat, and in 1946 40 of them were sent to a firing range at Supermarine, where their wings were stripped off and shot to pieces in weapons tests. Some had under 5 hours in the air. The Mark 22 cut down the rear fuselage, added the bubble canopy, and the enormous, spiteful tail. Around 270 were built. Most went to weekend squadrons, and 20 of them were sold to Egypt. The Mark 23 was to have a laminar flow wing and a new name, Valiant. They tested the wing on a Mark 8. It gave no worthwhile drag advantage and it handled badly. The Mark 23 was never built. Which brings us to the Mark 24. The last one. Most sources put it at 81 built, and 27 of those were converted Mark 22s. The final one left the factory in February 1948. 454 miles an hour, twice the weight of the Mark 1, more than twice the power, 80% better rate of climb. One RAF squadron ever flew it. Number 80. It went to Hong Kong, sat at Kai Tak with rockets under its wings and waited for a war that never came to it. The best Spitfire ever built never fired its guns in anger. Meanwhile, the Navy had been fighting its own war with the design. The Seafire, a Spitfire with a hook. The Mark 1B was a converted Mark 5B. The Mark 2C was purpose-built. The Mark 3 finally got folding wings, 1,220 of them. Then the Griffon versions, 15, 17, 45, 46, and finally the 47, with contra-rotating propellers to cancel out the torque that had been killing pilots. But the Spitfire was built to land on grass, and a carrier deck is not grass. At Salerno in September 1943, the Royal Navy put over 100 Seafires on escort carriers as in a flat calm. Without wind over the deck, they came in too fast. Hooks tore out. Propellers hit the steel. By the third morning, 39 were still flyable. 42 had been lost, and almost none of them to the enemy. 2 German aircraft were shot down in exchange. Roughly 1 Seafire lost or wrecked for every 9 sorties flown. The final answer to all of it, a new laminar flow wing on a new airframe, was called the Spiteful, and its naval brother, the Seafang. They flew, they were fast, and they were completely irrelevant because by then the jet engine existed and no propeller was ever going to matter again. On the 28th of January 1949, an aircraft called VR-971 rolled out of the factory at South Marston. A Seafire 47, the last of roughly 22,000 Spitfires and Seafires. And 10 days earlier, 3,000 miles away, Spitfires had killed each other. The 7th of January, 1949. A ceasefire in the Arab-Israeli war is due to take effect at 4 o'clock that afternoon. 3 air forces in that sky are flying Spitfires. The Royal Egyptian Air Force flies Mark 9 aircraft. The Israeli Air Force flies Mark 9 aircraft bought from Czechoslovakia, and their very first one was built out of British scrap and the salvaged engine of a shot-down Egyptian Spitfire. And the RAF, watching from the Canal Zone, flies the FR Mark 18. At 11:15, 4 FR Mark 18 aircraft of RAF 208 Squadron take off from Fayed to photograph the border. They find a column of smoke, an Israeli convoy hit minutes earlier by Egyptian aircraft, and go down low to look. Israeli anti-aircraft fire hits the number 2. He bails out, and 2 Israeli Spitfires arrive. The pilots are foreign volunteers. One is John McElroy, a Canadian wartime ace. The other is Chalmers Goodlin, an American who, 18 months earlier, had been Bell Aircraft's test pilot on the X-1 rocket plane, before he was replaced by a man named Chuck Yeager. They see Spitfires strafing an Israeli column. They assume Egyptian. McElroy shoots down the first. The pilot, Ron Sayers, is killed at the controls. He shoots down the second. Goodlin goes after the leader, Jeff Cooper, and here is the detail that ends this story. Goodlin later wrote that he could not close on the Spitfire Mark 18. It simply had more power than his Mark 9. So he did the only thing a Mark 9 could still do, the same thing a Mark 5 could do against a Fokker-Wulf 8 years earlier. He outturned him. Goodlin only recognized the RAF roundels after the other aircraft had already fired on him. 4 RAF Spitfires down. Later that afternoon, a Tempest as well, and its pilot, David Tattersfield, killed. 5-0. Britain demanded compensation and did nothing else. When Tattersfield was reburied at Ramleh, 6 Israeli airmen carried his coffin. The last Spitfires ever shot down in combat were shot down by Spitfires. And the aeroplane that won was the emergency bodge job from 1942. The Spitfire flew on for 5 more years, unarmed. On the 1st of April 1954, a PR Mark 19 took off from Seletar to photograph the jungle over Johor, with the words, "The last," painted on its cowling. That was the final operational sortie by an RAF Spitfire. Anywhere in the world, a Claim 81 squadron had to fight another squadron to be given. And in 1963, they took one out of retirement one more time. Not to fight, but to be fought. The RAF needed to know how a Mark II Lightning should attack a piston-engined fighter. So they put a Spitfire in the air at Binbrook and hunted it with a jet. 24 marks, 20,351 aircraft. And the man who designed it saw none of it. R.J. Mitchell died in 1937, aged 42, having watched only the prototype fly. Every single one of those 24 marks was somebody else's answer to somebody else's threat. And even then, 24 rebuilds, a legend and a film, and the Spitfire still wasn't the aircraft that shot down the most Germans in 1940. That belongs to a fighter nobody puts on a poster. And it isn't alone. Britain built a bomber out of wood that outran the fighters sent to stop it. A fighter with no forward-firing guns at all. And several that killed their own crews more efficiently than they killed anybody else's. They're all here, every one of them, in the video on screen right now.